Welcome to this explainer. Look, today we're going on a deep dive, a really immersive, almost cinematic journey into the fragile, practically invisible maritime arteries that keep our entire modern global economy alive. We're going to break down the actual anatomy of global trade, and specifically, we'll be looking at 14 very small, highly specific doors that quite literally control the world. I want you to start by picturing this: a massive, photorealistic vision of the globe, glowing in the dark, overlaid with thousands of bright lines of light representing the supply chain. It's almost like a human circulatory system, right? And those ships, they're the blood cells, continuously pumping energy, food, and raw materials across vast open oceans. Now, what if the world economy just stopped breathing tomorrow? Think about it. If a major artery gets blocked, the whole world suffers a catastrophic heart attack. Supermarket shelves empty out. Gas stations run completely dry. Hospitals run out of basic medicines. It's a terrifying thought, but as we're about to see, it's actually entirely possible. Sir Walter Raleigh actually hit the nail on the head centuries ago when he famously said, "Whosoever commands the sea commands the trade of the world, and consequently the world itself." And honestly, that's not just some outdated quote from the era of wooden galleons and pirates. It's a fundamental law of geopolitics that holds even truer today. True global dominance hasn't solely relied on massive land armies or even nuclear arsenals. It relies on the absolute control of what strategists call the sea lines of communication. And at the very heart of this massive global system is one critical concept: the choke point. So, what is it? A choke point is essentially a narrow, strategically vital maritime passage where exceptional volumes of global trade are just completely forced to transit. Think of them as the narrow gates of modern civilization. Because geography basically dictates the easiest path between land masses, massive fleets of ships get funneled into these super tight geographical bottlenecks. And here's the catch: if you control the bottleneck, well, you control absolutely everything trying to pass through it. And our reliance on these specific passages has surged massively over the last couple of decades. It's actually kind of mind-blowing. An astounding 90% of world trade by volume is completely dependent on the sea. We're talking about over 50,000 billion ton-miles of cargo. From the heaviest crude oil powering our cities down to the tiny microchips inside the phone in your pocket, the overwhelming majority of human physical consumption travels by water. All right, moving into section 1, the stakes. We're talking oil, food, and multi-billion-dollar arteries. Let me put a real dollar figure on this for you, just so we grasp the scale of what happens when things go wrong. $54 billion. Do you remember back in March 2021 when that massive Ever Given container ship got wedged in the Suez Canal? It blocked the route for just 6 days. Just 6. But in that tiny window, it inflicted a staggering $54 billion loss on the global economy. Goods, vital food supplies, machinery, it all just sat there, totally frozen on the water. It was a massive wake-up call showing us exactly how fragile our just-in-time global delivery system really is. So out of all the vast oceans on Earth, global food and energy security essentially boils down to just 14 main choke points. Just to give you an idea, the Turkish Straits alone handle 20% of global wheat exports. The Strait of Hormuz, a massive 30% of all global seaborne oil, passes right through those narrow waters. And then you have the Strait of Malacca, facilitating 25% of all global sea trade. So an interruption at literally any single one of these gates sparks immediate, cascading supply shortfalls and massive price spikes all over the planet. Which brings us to section 2, geopolitics and conflict, essentially the new economic warfare. Let's head over to Asia to see how this shapes intense national strategy. The Strait of Malacca, which connects the Indian and Pacific Oceans, is an artery so incredibly vital to China's supply chain that any threat to it has a name: the Malacca Dilemma. The big fear here is that during a major conflict, an opposing naval power, like the US, could blockade this specific strait, basically starving China's entire economy of fuel and resources overnight. And this very specific geographic anxiety, it's actually a massive driver behind China's trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative. They are desperately trying to build alternative land routes and ports just to bypass this one vulnerability. Meanwhile, on the flip side of the world, we have the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. This handles roughly 10 to 12% of global seaborne trade. As we've seen recently, this strait has been the site of intense, volatile conflict. It got so bad it prompted international naval task forces, like Operation Prosperity Guardian, to deploy massive military assets for one reason: to shield commercial shipping. It really proves that no single actor can just dominate these spaces outright without facing immediate, heavy pushback from global powers. And nations are rapidly adapting to all this mainland instability near these choke points. Instead of getting bogged down trying to control the chaotic Yemen mainland, which, as we know, is fraught with proxy conflicts, regional powers are getting smart. They're militarizing isolated islands like Perim and Socotra instead. They're out there building runways and surveillance bases, essentially setting up heavily armed offshore toll booths right in the middle of the water to monitor and deter threats from a safe distance.
All right, moving into Section 3, Modern Threats. We're looking at the digital and environmental horizons now.
Because, frankly, protecting the oceans today, it's not just about chasing pirates with guns anymore. It involves tackling a deeply interconnected web of threats. You've got the blue economy and human security crashing right into national security. We're talking everything from human trafficking and illegal fishing to incredibly severe, high-tech vulnerabilities. The scope of maritime crime is just vast, and our traditional landlocked view of security is really struggling to keep up with the pace.
And that brings us to a truly modern nightmare: cyber threats on the high seas. Ships today are absolute marvels of automation. They are massive, but their crew sizes are shrinking, and they rely heavily on really complex computer networks for navigation. Think about this. If hackers were to remotely hijack the systems of a vessel, say a massive liquefied natural gas tanker, they could theoretically steer it completely off course, run it aground in a busy commercial harbor, or even trigger an explosion. It literally turns a commercial transport ship into a catastrophic, remotely piloted weapon. It sounds like a movie, but it's a real concern.
Next up, Section 4, the Arctic Alternate, a bridge across two oceans.
So there is this fascinating geographical rivalry unfolding right now. On one hand, you have the Panama Canal, a super reliable, modernized marvel of engineering. But it comes with a catch: exorbitant tolls, sometimes hitting up to $1 million just for one of the largest ships to pass through. On the other hand, you have the emerging Northwest Passage up in the melting Arctic. It is essentially toll-free and offers a route between the U.S. East Coast and Asia that is up to 30% shorter. Geographically speaking, it is the ultimate global shortcut.
But for Panama, that alternate route poses a looming economic disaster. 39%, that is the staggering chunk of the Panama Canal's total tonnage that relies entirely on that specific East Coast to Asia route. If global shipping companies decide en masse to take the Arctic shortcut to save on transit time and those massive toll fees, the economic fallout for Panama would be absolutely devastating. We'd be looking at a complete rewiring of global trade routes.
So you might be wondering, why hasn't everyone moved to the Arctic yet? Well, the Arctic isn't exactly ready to replace the canals tomorrow. The ice conditions up there are incredibly capricious and unpredictable. To even sail safely, companies have to invest heavily in super expensive, polar code compliant, double-hulled ships that burn much pricier fuel. On top of that, the entire region suffers from a complete lack of deepwater port infrastructure and crucial topographic data. You can't just sail a standard cargo ship through melting ice. Making this route viable requires a massive, coordinated infrastructural leap that will probably take decades.
Finally, Section 5, the future of free seas, navigating the choke points.
We really need to remember this one fundamental metric: 75%. 3/4 of all world trade is funneled through just a few of these tiny geographic vulnerabilities. Whether it's the Strait of Malacca, the Bab el-Mandeb, or the Strait of Hormuz, these incredibly narrow passages are the Achilles heel of our modern globalization. Our daily survival, our comfort, our economies, literally all of it depends entirely on the uninterrupted, peaceful passage of these ships across the global commons. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. The next time you're out buying groceries or filling up your gas tank or grabbing a package off your front porch, ask yourself, if the narrow doors of global trade were slammed shut tomorrow, whether by a war, a cyber attack, or even just a single stuck ship, how long would it take for our modern world to stop breathing? Honestly, how long could your city survive? Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on the oceans, guys, because that is where the future of our world is truly being decided.